All right, I think we are recording now. I'm going to start this. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. My name is Saurabh Gupta, and I'm joined with Akash today for a conversation on data masking in the enterprise. Before we start, just a disclaimer, none of us works for a law firm. This is not legal advice. This is purely for informational purposes. I work for a company that is a Salesforce partner, but this is not their point of view. This is just my point of view or my company's, and same with Akash and Saro, it's their point of view. With that, I'm going to take a minute to introduce myself. My name is Saurabh Gupta. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Compliance. We are a Salesforce partner, and we operate in the space of data privacy and to make data privacy, security, and compliance simple for Salesforce customers. My background is I spent about 7+ years at Salesforce. Last, I was the Senior Director for Global Enterprise Architecture. So tons of experience in technology, particularly in enterprise space, B2B, B2C, CRM, ERPs, enterprise service buses, service-oriented architectures, all 3-letter, 4-letter acronyms for technology. By academic background, I have a master's in design and an MBA. So I do like to think of myself as someone who's coming with more of a design thinking and approach to solve these problems. I like to blog avidly. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. And I'm based in icy cold Chicago. So that's me. I'm going to turn it over to Akash.
Thanks, Saurav. Hi, guys. I'm a data privacy consultant. I used to work for KPMG earlier. What I have done is in the past 3 years with GDPR, my career was also born, and I took some time over that period to learn data privacy. I have an inclination towards technology, and that is what has happened in last 3.5 years, 4 years. Took some time, took CIPT, CIPPE, got into the FIP club. I host a small podcast called Privacy Cast. Also run a company called Saro. So Saro does it does like whatever Saurabh does. We just do some consulting out of it. So yeah, I think that's something that I would like to sum this up. Yeah, back to you, Saurabh.
Thanks, Akash. So in terms of agenda, what we're going to cover today is an introduction to what is data masking. We will talk about the business case for it. We'll talk about what kind of techniques are applied for data masking, kind of a little bit more of the use case and demo. We'll also talk about how do we go about doing it? What's kind of the high level process of thinking about it from an enterprise rollout perspective? We have some resources in the next steps, and obviously you can reach out to me after this conversation. We will cover some question and answers. So as I mentioned earlier, please do put your questions or specific areas that you would like for us to maybe spend a few more minutes on. Please do put them in the chat, and of course we'll also take any questions at that point over the call here. So with that, let me spend a minute talking about what is really happening when we talk about data masking. So it's really the process by which you look at information and you're taking out all the sensitive, personally identifiable information, business sensitive or classified information, like who do we sell to, how much do we sell it for, right? Any and every bit of information that is relevant either to your enterprise or relevant from a privacy perspective. If you need to take it out for legal compliance, security, or other reasons, that's what data masking is about. So you see an example of an unmasked record for Adam Sandler with a phone number. And what you also see is the corresponding masked record. You can see that we can change names with fictitious names or remove values or randomly generate information and put it in there. That's kind of the 50,000 foot view. I'm going to turn it over to Akash to get a little bit into the trends and some of the trends around it.
Yep. So, Saurabh, would you mind muting Annette Pods? Yeah, she may be mistakenly.
All right, hold on just let me do that. Is there a control?
In Zoom in participants?
Right. I thought there was something that I could just mute all.
She just muted. She just muted. Yeah.
All right. So go ahead.
Thanks, Annette. So talking about trends, I think before talking about trends, I would like to point out. I think once we go through these slides, we have a section where we will talk about, we'll give samples on how data masking is done. And I'm calling that out because we will not just do text, we will do implementation discussion. So talking about trends, regulatory requirements with GDPR, after GDPR, CCPA, LGPD, PDPB, all the privacy jargons, right? PDPA, Australian law, New Zealand law, everyone is there, right? Everyone is there to fence, stop processing of data. So data masking became important. Let's even for a small example, like testing test environment data, right? Or there is some sensitive personal data that needs to be masked so that, so what do you do to precious things at your home, right? You put them in lockers, right? So data is precious for any organization now. So data masking is a type of lock that we put over it. Looking at external factors, let's take an example. The data is just lying out there. There's no data masking being done. Somebody breaches your organization, and we know social acts happening right now. So state-sponsored acts, malwares, ransomware. We are not far away, right? We are very close to them. So when they come to you, uh, is your data fenced? Uh, is it safeguarded? Is it in a locker at least? The thief has entered your house, but the precious stuff, is it in the locker or not? Uh, so that is something that we choose through data masking. Um, cross-border data flow, work from home. We have a lot more data than we had in last 1 year, right? And it is just increasing. What work from home did is it did digital transformation. Even companies that never wanted to go online, they had to go online. Data increased, cross-border data flow increased. So yeah, data masking has become important. Yeah.
All right.
So okay, so we understand that anywhere across the globe, be it Australia, Brazil, Canada. So I think let's take a step back. GDPR came in. GDPR said European Union, if approves data flow to your country, yes, you can take the data there. Canada, I think one of the first, PIPEDA was one of the first to have free flow of data. So what happened? All the countries across the globe, they want to do business with Europe, right? And when they want to do business with Europe, having a free data flow is an advantageous task, as an advantage to them. So yeah, uh, we can see why these laws are coming up. So coming on to data masking techniques, I think a lot of people here, if you have read about data masking, you know that data masking there are a lot of data masking techniques, and there are a lot different. Every book has a different understanding and knowledge about this. But we wanted it to look at from a compliance angle, from a privacy compliance angle, and look back to GDPR, where we took motivation in data privacy. So we divided into two parts: anonymization and pseudonymization. Uh, Anonymization, GDPR doesn't apply. Pseudonymization, GDPR applies. And that is the elephant in the room, right? Whether GDPR will apply or not, or any personal data law will apply or not. So yeah, uh, pseudonymization, we can see three techniques in general: custom seeding, encryption, and a few more other techniques that we can use. Yeah. So anonymization, yeah. So now we know that anonymized data doesn't follow like under GDPR. That is something that gives us a lot of relief. So if let's take an example, let's take an example of a data subject access request. This is a discussion that I am in a lot of times. Data subject access request bring a lot of trouble to a lot of companies. Somebody comes back and says, hey, can you delete the data that you have for me, right? When it's consent, it's easy, right? It's you, because it's definitely not easy, but because you already know that right to be forgotten can be applied anytime. So you are always ready with that. But let's say to a case scenario where some photos are there, right? 10 people are there, and one person comes up and says, hey, can you delete my photo? But other 10 people and your business needs the photo on the site. So what can you do now? So put a smiley over it, delete that face. Yeah, that's anonymization for you. So yeah, Uh, so what's different? I think we are coming round and round to data masking, right? Looking at techniques. What is so different between anonymization and pseudonymization? Why pseudonymization falls under GDPR? Because when we pseudonymize the data that is created may not have PII directly, right? It may become a data that is that you cannot understand, but still there is an algorithm that sits behind which has been used to convert this data to an unreadable format until somebody can reach back to a person using an identifier or a data. It is personal data. I am trying to quote the GDPR definition here. So so what will happen now? So now pseudonymization comes is subject to GDPR, uh, and data masking techniques will lead to data retention then, right? Because the data retention technique that was followed earlier, that we use, said, okay, we have 5 years of 5 years of retention period, right? We have decided that, but we have pseudonymized the data. So we should not forget here that all the GDPR regulations, right, all the rights that are to be provided to a data subject are to be provided still, right? Yeah, we can go one more and discuss. Okay. So anybody has any question? I think till now we are open for questions. I know this is some this is not technical at all, but yeah, I think anonymization and pseudonymization. I think we'll get technical once Saurabh starts showing uh, how it is actually done on the ground, and that would be really interesting for me also. Yeah. So okay, if there are no questions, I'll keep continuing. So sample data custom seeding. So we have divided pseudonymization right now into three parts. We'll start with custom seeding. So let's say you are a CTO of the company, right? And you have data sets. There's a huge data set. You are Flipkart, you are Facebook, you are any biggies, right? Any small company. So when the data comes to you, you create a seed of the data, right? You scramble the data, right? You have a data set of 10 columns. You scramble the data to different data sets. Different columns go to different data sets, right? 10 columns, 10 data sets. But there will be a seed value which connects all the data sets to each other. So with that seed value, you can always get all the data back, right? So that's, but still, because there is a seed value and there is an option to get the data back and identify them, it is under GDPR, and that is custom seeding for you in terms of pseudonymization. Yeah. Okay. I know everybody knows encryption here, and I know why you know it, because we look at it from an angle of, I think if we all are privacy professionals, if somebody is not, maybe uh, we can discuss that again. But yeah, if let's say we do encryption, for security, right? But what encryption also does is it converts the data into an unreadable format, right? And once that data, but data is still there, right? So, and it is PII. If there is PII and it has been, and we use encryption, it is still PII in an unreadable format. And we can still use a key or a cipher to go back and unlock that data and use that data, right? So yeah, encryption, and I think quoting it out, which here is encryption is in both the forms, in motion and at rest, and both the forms are important in terms of data masking, because it makes it unreadable at that point in time. For a hacker, once he comes in, he can still not find. And if you, let's say, do asymmetric encryption, just makes it more difficult for people to understand the data. Yeah.
Oops, I'm having some trouble.
Okay.
Hi.
Okay. So we were talking about encryption, right? So when we talk about encryption, we were talking about marathon, right? We were running a long race and we were spending a lot of time doing that. Let's talk about sprints, right? I think if anybody is doing marathons here, he would definitely be knowing sprints, right? Anybody is a sports player. So you are a CTO again, right? And there is a data that is coming in from X data set, and for Y product, for Z employees, right? You have HRMS, you have so many data, right? So what do you do? For one data set, you can do character scrambling, right? Make sure that A becomes Z, Z becomes P, and keeps adding. Maybe you use an arithmetic where 1 plus 3, 1 plus 5, 1 plus 7, right? As simple as that. And you do character scrambling. So let's take an example. Akarsh, right? Akarsh becomes, rather than AKARSH, it becomes ASHAR, something like that. So that is character scrambling, right? And if you do this to a whole data set, you will not be able to read it, right? And especially the use case scenario that I have seen for this is, if you remember, you get IT tickets, right? And IT tickets, once they come to you, you do not want, the company doesn't want you to see maybe the IT guy's details, or guy should not see the detail of the person who's sitting inside, because IT guys who are helping out are mostly contractors in the companies. So yeah, so to keep the data away from vendors, they do character scrambling. So my name will never be shown to him. He can listen to my voice, but my name gets scrambled. Yeah. Coming on to substitution, right? Now, very similar to scrambling. You can substitute every value with something else. You can change a name into a number, right? A number into a name, right? And moving on to shuffling, I think again, pseudonymization, you find an algorithm that you like and you use that algorithm to convert the data into a data which is unreadable. So that can also be done by shuffling, right? You just change the data sets across. Put data in column 1 into data column 6, but because you don't want it to be readable, but once you want it to be readable, you just reverse that algorithm. This the most beautiful one is number and date variance. And I was just telling Saurabh, this is something that I have been reading a lot about. So number variance, why is it so special? Now let's think about a data set. So also remember, when we talk about data set, we also talk about data sets because they are used for a lot of things. They are used for machine learning, they are used for artificial intelligence, right? They are used to predict data, right? Now, if something is to be used to predict, right, something is to be used for data analytics, we have to keep the data close. If let's say we have a data set as simple as 100, 110, 120, 130, 140, right? We have six, I think five. I'm sorry, my maths is not getting better. Uh, Now, when I use number variance, what will happen is this data, I will find a mean and I will start deleting, right? And like decreasing some value from this data. So my data will become, rather than 100, it will become 97. 110 will maybe become 98. 120 maybe become 123. And 140 may become 160. But it will be very close. So what will happen end of day is it keeps this data overall altogether will keep the relations that are there in the database. And that is the beauty about number and date variance. Yeah, over to you, Saurabh.
Thank you so much, Akash. This was really interesting. So now let's take a minute and switch gears. We'll talk about what are the business use cases and applicability of data masking and some of the common ones that we've seen. And we'll try to take a look at how this can really get implemented. We'll look at how this can happen in Salesforce, for example. And basically, the underlying techniques and the philosophy remains the same, regardless of which application you apply it to. So the three prominent use cases for this is right to be forgotten, which is a very commonly talked about, highly exercised privacy right under GDPR and CCPA, LGPD, and other privacy regulations around the world. We'll also talk about data retention and minimization, and finally, sandbox data masking. I think what we have seen is a huge number of our customers are really very interested in these areas, and quite literally in this sequence. We hear the most about RTBF, followed by retention, followed by masking. So a little bit on what exactly happens and why masking is relevant for right to be forgotten. So the idea here is when someone makes a request for right to be forgotten or data deletion or erasure, we do have two options from a technology perspective. We could go into our applications and actually delete the record itself. And in a number of cases, that is a great option. But for a lot of other scenarios, that's not such a legitimate option, because when you delete data instead of masking it, you risk, corrupting your reports, your analytics, as Akash pointed out, other uses of data that may exist if you mask it, such as AI, training machine learning, testing, user acceptance type things. So there's a lot of value of preserving information, but removing all the personal identifiers and business sensitive identifiers. And that's the scenario for right to be forgotten. Really, the question there is how do you as an organization go from this, where you have personal data, to a very de-identified version of this data? And that's where these three areas come in. Anonymization, which is very commonly used for like required field values on a record. So you may have business rules that first name and last name are required. So I can't exactly go and wipe them out. I need to put some other value. I may anonymize it. Healthcare information, financial information. There are a lot of such use cases where anonymization is a very legitimate choice. And as Akash pointed out, you are with anonymization, you kind of get off the hook a little bit from a GDPR point of view if you do it right. The second part of this, and again, there is no one answer, you may have a combination of these techniques, is pseudonymizing. And you may do pseudonymization for non-personal business, sensitive data, where it's not really about me, the individual, but maybe I sell to US Department of Defense and to, these other entities, and I want to just remove that information, scramble it, do something else. And I can choose to use a pseudonymization type approach. And finally, for a number of other elements within a record, for example, you may just choose to erase values. So these are optional fields, very classic example tend to be more unstructured data, chat transcript, long text, comments, things like that. So really, when you're looking at something like a right to be forgotten, you're looking at a combination of these different techniques to really arrive at a truly forgotten piece of information that still has value. So what I'm going to do now is switch over for a minute and show you some of this in action. So bear with me. Actually, I think I was just sharing this one screen. So let me share my entire screen here. My apologies, should have done that earlier. All right, and let me know if you can't see my screen. You can see my screen, right? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you. So here is an example. This is a right to be forgotten DSAR inside Salesforce for this person. And you can look at this person in Salesforce, right? Very classic example. And you have a bunch of information for this person, their contact information, some activities for them, some other unstructured data, a lot of the kind of information that you either have to delete all of it if you can, or in certain scenarios like the ones we were discussing, you may want to change these values and basically mask this record. So, that's kind of what we do at Cloud Compliance. So if you look at this example here, I'm going to click this button and all of the information on this person and the related entities will be masked. And that's data masking in action, one-on-one, right? So whether you're doing it for Salesforce or if you're building your own solution for, any of your enterprise applications, the techniques that Akash mentioned, they're sort of the building blocks to arriving at such solutions. And what you will see here in a minute is that everything that's on this record will typically just get wiped out. And we can set these to a significant level of granularity in terms of what fields you want to anonymize versus pseudonymize versus erase versus delete. So quite a bit of sophistication goes into this, but the payback for businesses is incredible. I want to make sure that I can run my reports to figure out our history with this person. I don't know this person anymore. As you can see, they are like now completely unidentifiable. I can't reach back into this. I've removed all associated, secondary data. And that's kind of, as an enterprise architect, that's one of the things when I speak with my customers, I want them to understand how profound it is to do this right, both from a liability perspective and also from improving your own internal ability to still preserve valuable business data without knowing whose it is, because sometimes that may not matter.
I just wanted to point out that the email address is like really helps with .com in the end. I think you do it on purpose because
Yes. Yes. And that's one of the things when you look at data masking, as a technologist, when you're implementing it, you have to be very sensitive about these because most systems have data type validation built in. So in an email field, I can't put ABC123, right? I have to follow the format of that data type. So we spend a lot of time doing those kind of things so that this works flawlessly. All right, so switching gears back here to our conversation on this. The second classic use case for this is really around, I'm gonna just move back out of this, sorry about that, is around data minimization and retention. And the idea here is that you're doing it for two reasons. One is it's the law, particularly with GDPR, you are obligated to have a retention and a minimization policy, and you enforce it across all your systems. The second reason to do it is you want to reduce your data footprint. It's good from a system performance perspective, but it also reduces your breach impact. Like God forbid, if you were to have a breach, you don't want to go and explain to regulators and then to angry ex-customers or customers, why do you have data that is 7-8 years old when they've never done any business with you in the last this much amount of time. So when you think about visualizing this, right, if you look at it on a timeline, you have legitimate business data, you have lawful basis for processing it, and you would apply some sort of a retention period to it, right? That is your retention policy. So your CISO, your DPO, your IT folks may have mandated some policy. And when this data meets that retention period, what you're trying to do is you're then looking at this information and doing a combination of data masking or deletion. This is one of the key use cases that we get all the time from our customers. It's becoming more and more important, particularly with some recent large data breaches that have happened. And if you're Marriott or British Airways or some of those brands that have had a great trusted relationship with customers forever, I mean, this is incredibly bad press and just very hard to kind of recover from. So we are seeing more and more customers going down this path to make sure that they are doing this right. So that's our second scenario. We do this, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to talk about it briefly in a minute. The third area, which is really gaining more and more importance, is sandbox data masking. Again, I've taken a Salesforce example, but this is equally valid for any technology that you have, homegrown or otherwise. Typically, what happens is you have a production system, and as you create and refresh your sandboxes, they basically get data from production. And that's a challenge, right? Because this is real customer information that is now in your sandbox. Sandboxes by design have lower security and permissioning type environment because you want developers to be able to test things, scale them up. So they have access to all kind of information. Everything that was super protected in production, a number of times is mostly wide open. Everybody gets an admin view all access. That's a risk that happens. And data masking is a key technique to ensure that as this information moves into sandboxes, then you can apply those. So we as a company do sandbox data masking. Our product data masker basically masks data within sandboxes, again, with the same degree of flexibility for field level, what do you want there? And the things that Akash was talking about. So we do support things like you can have custom values, a whole set of things. You may have mock product names. If you are into digital vouchers, you may have mock digital voucher numbers that you can apply, right? If you need to randomize it. If you want it to be culturally sensitive, maybe you have a UAT environment and you are training people in China and you want this data to be masked with Chinese names and culture and nuances and locale. So there's a lot of sophistication that goes into things like these. I want to give you guys a little bit more of a sense of that for a minute, and then we can continue on. So here is an example of data masking, right? So this is a configuration for a sandbox. And what you see is like literally for every entity. And this is more of a Salesforce parlance, but if you are doing it for other applications, literally every table that you have, you want to have a masking type mapping. You're going to say, what information for contacts am I going to, what attributes on contact am I going to mask? For first name, last name, phone numbers, emails, things like that. What kind of masking am I applying? Is it a regular expression that I'm generating? Is it a pattern from some custom list? So
Saurabh,
I
I have a
have,
question for you.
yeah, sure.
So like here in this field masking, so like when we say first name, does
Mhm.
it mean that in my database it has categorized these PIIs? Is it?
Great question. So I was going to talk about it a little bit when we get into the how, because bec- right now what's happening is we are talking about the applicability of data masking. The foundation for that, to your point, which is a really good point, the foundation for that is how well do you classify and categorize this information, right? You have to have a classification where you say there are certain elements here that are PII or others that are SP, semi-personal, or there are health related, or they're finance related, or we don't really care. It's just some information that we don't even need to mask. So yeah, that's a great point. The other thing that's interesting here is, as I was talking about like patterns, right? That is, if you're doing masking, or if you're in the business of setting policies for masking, it's a really good idea to work, very sort of hand in glove with your technology counterparts. And if you're a technology guy, it's a good idea to work with your legal and IT, security counterparts to make sure that the masking meets the threshold from a compliance perspective, right? You may have random names in there, you may have regular expressions, whatever it is you want to do, you want to offer the level of granularity that actually meets the compliance threshold. um, so let me jump back into our presentation here. So I have just maybe one more slide, and then we can get to question and answers very quickly. So these are really the three broad areas from a data masking perspective. Then we come across how do you really go about it, right? And this is kind of dovetails into what Akash was mentioning earlier. When you think about masking, the use cases is really sort of the grand finale, right? This is the execution. But the prelude to that is starting with data categorization. You want to look at data across the enterprise, whether you have Salesforce, SAP, NetSuite, homegrown apps, whatever, right? You're going to look at this and you'll say, where all do I have personal data? Customers, contacts, leads, volunteers, employees, partners, whatever they're called in your industry, right? Insured assets, right? Subscribers, whatever that is, you want to categorize where does this live. And it's also from a GDPR standpoint, one of the first things that happens, right? This whole record of processing activity and the data categorization around it. Once you have done this, then you want to look at each of these entities. So I've said I have customer records in Salesforce. I also have it in NetSuite, and I also have it in my data warehouse, and I have it in the two homegrown apps I use and in my web app that uses this SQL Server database, right? So once you've identified, now you're trying to determine those identity attributes. So where does this contact information live? What are personal contact, on that contact table or on that contact object in Salesforce? What are identifying attributes? First name, last name, date of birth, things like that. And then there may be other things that are not so identifying. And this is where that collaboration between your legal, compliance, security, and IT happens. Most successful projects require that kind of across the board, collaboration. What makes deploying data masking across the enterprise hard is really not so much the technology challenges, right? Sure, you have to do tech things, but what makes these things hard is that they are team sport. See, in the past, we would be like, given something, technology guys can go build it, come back, maybe do some collaboration from an agile perspective. But what's changing now is that business and technology are not only equal sort of partners in it, they are equal stakeholders. The risk of success and failure here is no longer a technology or a business problem or a compliance problem. It is a company problem. So anyway, so you go through this and then you specify masking approach. What do I anonymize? What do I pseudonymize? What do I delete? What do I erase? Things like that. And then you get to the actual implementation part of it. How do you implement, say, data retention, or how do you implement masking, or RTBF, or whatever else you are doing. One of the points here, again, a reminder, which Akash mentioned earlier, which I so like, is that if you're not anonymizing, if you're pseudonymizing, there is a chance that that data becomes, you could reverse engineer it to an identification point. In those kind of use cases, you have to make sure that your retention policies applied to pseudonymized data. That's one of the gotchas that you would see, and that's, I so appreciated when Akash said this. I didn't realize, because that's one of those very seasoned experience thing that you realize when you're doing it at a massive level, that you're thinking, oh, we are done, we pseudonymize, we anonymize, it's all great, but it's not, unfortunately. So anyway, that's on this. A little bit more in terms of next steps. IAPP has some excellent resources on this, and we will put this in the LinkedIn group, so you will have the ability to kind of reach out and look at these things. You can also take a look at more information on this, specifically on data retention, data masking, or on just GDPR and everything related to it from our website at Cloud Compliance. You can learn more about the great work that Akash and his company is doing on Saro's website. And I think these are excellent resources to get an idea. If you have any more questions, comments, we look at Q&A, but feel free to reach out to Akash or to me. We are both on LinkedIn and quite active, and you can reach out to us there. I will take a minute and actually, show both the websites. But before that, let me jump to Q&A. Any questions, comments? I'm going to take a look at
So Saurabh, I think there is one question from Reena.
Absolutely.
Which is, I think the question says, is this the best way to address a data security requirement? So data security as such can never have one answer, or a military, right? When we fight back other countries, right, on the ground, there's no, you cannot say Air Force is important, or the force on the ground is important, or the Navy is important, right? Everybody is important. And that are the steps that we have to take one by one. And yeah, it's getting
Yeah, I
really
would.
difficult. Yeah. So
Sorry.
Rina, that I hope I have answered you. Data masking is like safeguarding your precious things at home and just putting it in locker.
Yeah, I got it, Akash. Thanks. So a follow-up question on that was, now organizations who are in the process of, adopting data protection laws and building their compliance frameworks and so on, while they define the data retention policy, are there any tools, in the market or the industry which is adopting, where such data classification aspects are integrated with the data deletion or those measures which need to be taken? Because most of the organizations will have legacy data, right? And they would have evolved over a period of time. So adopting a kind of advanced architecture would be difficult to make a decision at the org level. Are there tools which are available which can be looked at based on the experience which you have?
So I think so if we look at RTBF, right, right to be forgotten, I think every tool in the market is trying to prove that solution, right? Even we were just discussing in the Salesforce perspective, Cloud Compliance does that, right, for the CRM. I think coming back to the question, I think it just became a very subjective and a very big question. And every problem, if you look at data deletion, if you look at data masking, or if you look at every problem is an ocean in itself, right? So yeah, I think we have to look at it one by one in answering whether there are tools or not. It has to be managed. I think privacy folks are here, right? We have to manage everything purpose by purpose. So the first thing that we do is we define processing. The second thing we do is we define purpose, right? And then we do legal basis. So depending on purpose, we have to delete data. And if you are asking, if the question is also saying it out loud, that if we are at a level where we start mapping purpose with data, with anonymized data, and we make sure that it gets deleted, I think when we are taking consent, in case of Salesforce, it may be possible. But when there is a DSAR for employee record deletion, it's a very there is a reason why responding to DSARs on an average is costing 2,500 euros, 3,000 euros for organizations. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to add something here to Reena, to both of your questions. So I think one of the first one was, is this the best way to address data security requirement? And I think I'll chime in with Akash here. It's the classic consulting answer of it depends. what I've seen with most customers is it's almost always a combination of techniques. Data masking happens to be a fairly important one, but it's not the only one, right? In some scenarios, just outright deleting makes a lot of sense. We have customers where this data right to be forgotten. Like files is a great example. You may have files, attachments, photos, which you just outright delete. There are other areas where you're going to do specifically like a redaction type thing, right? I have emails and just pull out someone's name from it, or kind of obfuscate that. So there is always a combination, and it's unfortunately hard to give a more sort of cookie cutter answer. To the other question on tools, from if I understand the question correctly, and I think it's a really interesting point, is you've made these policies, you've done this data inventory and like a bunch of things like these, but how do you then take this, which may probably be sitting locked in Excel or in some standalone tool? How do you take something like this and then take it all the way and apply that categorization and classification to your retention, to your RTBF, to your data masking? And that's a space that we are actually doing a lot of work in. And this is one area, personal data discovery, where we do this whole inventory for Salesforce and also bring in data from other systems like NetSuite or whatever. But the idea that you take this and then apply it across the board for retention, for masking, for RTBF is something that's still sort of newer in tech. I think particularly as you do system by system by system, it's just a very large enterprise integration problem to solve. So we are working actively in that space with other customers as well. The third question, I'm going to let Akash see if you have a perspective on this. Rutika is asking, are there any cons and precautions to be taken for data masking?
Okay.
I mean, I can talk about tech, but I'm curious if you have a privacy point of view on that.
So I think cons or things to remember rather is something called algorithms that we use to mask that data. So if let's say we have pseudonymized the data and we have used some algorithm X to mask the data, it can be a parabolic algorithm. It can be anything, right? It can be an ellipse that we use. So yeah, not going into maths, but that algo that was used needs to be safeguarded, right? Because once it's out to the hacker, just like an encryption key, it is out and people can re-identify it. Yep. And in terms of anything bad, I think the only thing that can go that happens is if let's say if you save two databases, you save one database of original data and you save another database of pseudonymized data, it takes more space. And that is a general problem that we see, and people are still trying to adopt to this methodology where they are trying to pseudonymize it, but still they are wary and they try to keep two databases right now. So yeah, the problem is there.
Yeah, I would add to this, if you're doing it for a specific, at least, and I'm the tech guy, right? So from a technology perspective, if you're doing it for a specific application, it may not be that difficult. If you're trying to do it across the enterprise, it tends to start becoming difficult. And it has to do with the underlying lack of consistency in database design. See what's happened. If you look at the enterprise space in the last 30 years, we got technology and we just kind of put everything everywhere, right? So most companies don't have a very deliberately planned data structure, right? You have 100 attributes on contact in your homegrown system. You have 250 in Salesforce. You have 75 in NetSuite, and so on and so forth. So when you think about applying data masking across the enterprise, it tends to become harder because it's partly a data management problem. It's actually as much a data management problem as it is a data privacy and security problem. So that would be my con on and precaution on this is like, this is not something where you just go in as only a privacy professional or only as a technologist. Again, back to you need a good balance of both of them. I hope that was useful, Rutika. Any other questions?
Saurabh, adding to your point there, would it be worthwhile also from an approach perspective to first identify the value of data, right? A financial data has a different value compared to personal data from an HR perspective. So is it advisable to identify data values and then approach in terms of what classification we would apply, and then what kind of techniques would be applicable based on the sensitivities of such data?
Yeah, interesting perspective. I'm going to go even a step before that, right? Even before the value, right? So the reason businesses are doing this, right? Let's start with their what's the strategy and why do we even bother, and then talk about the value of respective data. So what I'm hearing, what I've heard so far is really two major set of reasoning, right? There is the reasoning around legal, I don't want to get fined or sued, like kind of like the loss prevention thinking, which is all fines, leaks, risks, breaches, compliance, regulatory requirement, which is not so much like I want to do, but I kind of feel like, oh, I have to do, right? The other part of this, which is very much driven by digital transformation, is the notion that how can we move faster? How can we be more innovative? Because I wasn't doing e-commerce, before COVID came, and now I'm forced to do e-commerce, which means my underlying data structures need to have enough, symmetry that they can integrate with each other. So my e-commerce engine, which has my, customer registration, billing information, orders, whatever, needs to connect to my Salesforce, which is CRM. So I need data standardization. My Salesforce in turn connects with Marketing Cloud or Pardot or some marketing technology that sends out emails and SMS and, all of that stuff. So the value of data itself inherently at a data category level, in my opinion, is driven more by these broader trends of, I have regulatory and security requirements and obligations so that I don't get into trouble. And also by, I need to be able to do better economically, be a more agile business and do things like that. If you start there, and if you map from that to data, the answer would become very, very clear. There are areas where you'd go, we don't care about this data. We don't even want to mask it, delete it, get it over with. A great example is, a lot of information that from a reporting point goes into data warehouses. At some point you mask it. At other points you aggregate it up. Like I've worked with clients, particularly in regulated industries, insurance, FinServ, healthcare type, which have like 20, 30, 40, 50 years worth of data, tape backups and physical ways or whatever. They've just never deleted anything. Everything was just hoarded up until these laws came around. So now what you could do is you could take a lot of that, which is very low value added, doesn't really, change significantly, just old, obsolete, aggregate it down, have trends and whatever. And then there's other data that is highly valuable, and you look at it and you standardize it, you mask it, and you really do this in the context of the broader strategy of loss prevention and increasing revenues. Does that make sense?
Yeah, a long answer. Yeah, but it gives a perspective. Yeah, because I was coming from a approach, where you have small organizations or medium scale organizations who are in the process of defining their strategy with specifically looking at the India PDPB, which is coming up. Mm-hmm. Do we need to relook at our architecture of the way we are organized in terms of data? I was coming from that perspective to get an answer on, which I think you have explained in detail. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think the answer is yes, in short. Absolutely. Yeah. As a technologist, I kind of like the fact that compliance and regulatory constraints are forcing businesses to reevaluate these things, because otherwise a lot of this unfortunately wasn't getting worked upon. Akanksha makes a point, just to add to Akarsh's point, maybe you can keep your algorithm separate from your data. Yes, actually customers do that, Akanksha, but I'm not aware of like off-the-shelf products that do it, but I know of, like, I have customers who have separated this out, and they've done this mostly from a good software engineering practice, right? And they have this centralized sort of thing where that is kind of regulating and changing this information. And that way they just make change in one place, and then it can be applied across multiple areas. Great point. Other comments or questions by the way, I'm just kind of sharing the screen, and this is Saro's website. You can go there, learn about the products and services Akarsh's company has.
Yeah.
Hi Akash. Uh,
Hi, Divyansh.
Hi
Did you
sir.
not like the website?
No, no. So I have one hypothetical question. Like recently, I have faced one issue. On that, I'm asking. Like taking a company where there is no infosec, there is no compliance team, and they are working from the scratch. So if I want to integrate the DLP solution and I have to create policy over there, meanwhile I have to do masking thing also in an integrated way. How I start my approach and what are like the things if I say a privacy by design approach from both, how can I start? I need guidance on that.
So Divyansh, I am Saurabh, if you want to take this one, because I cannot relate, because privacy by design and DLP are just going round by round.
Oh, sorry, I just kind of didn't pay that much attention, honestly, because you were asking specifically Akarsh.
Yeah.
But
So now let me take it up. Let me try. So let's say we use DLP, right? Now what DLP does is, it once we implement a data leakage, data loss prevention system, it starts reading all the data, right? That algorithm will start according to the rules that have been set by you, Divyansh, in the company that you're going to work. The data is going to be read about, right? If it has PII, if it has SPII, and if that email is going out, it will flag it, right? And it will try to stop it. But the DLP will read it, right? And the purpose, I think if you think about processing here, it mostly is getting done because of a legitimate interest of the company. It is going to happen, and that is a security requirement. In terms of privacy by design, I don't know. It's just a product that you're applying, Divyansh, right? You are just implementing DLP. So
Correct,
privacy
correct,
by
correct.
design.
Look, I'm designing one product in a company where there's no infosec, there's no compliance team. So I'm doing both work from a scratch. So I want
Mhm.
to integrate these two operations in a one go.
Okay.
so I
Like
can.
I'm not, like now I'm rephrasing my question in a different way. I'm
Hmm.
working in a broking firm. So in this broking firm, we are one creating a broking application. Under that, even same time, I'm implementing a new DLP in our organization. So what I have to do, like I want to do both. I want to do both work in a same way, like to create a policy in a same way, which I have to encrypt the thing in my databases for the application.
Yeah, I can. Let me chime in this one. So Divyansh, your infosec policy needs to follow your compliance requirements. So while you're saying they're in parallel, like as a technologist, to me, the requirement of what I'm implementing, like infosec to me is the implementation, whether it's process, technology, whatever, it is the implementation of your compliance, right? So if you have a legal stakeholder or some compliance person or group, and they come and they said, these are the things we want to do, and say encryption is one of them, for example, then I can take that and then I'll go and look at from an infosec perspective, what kind of encryption would I apply? How would I meet these requirements? And one of the things where I think people like me and people like Akarsh thrive is that intersection, right? Businesses can give me requirements, I can solution it, or Akash can solution it, and that's kind of what you would have to do. So every time you say that they're happening in parallel, I'm like, not really. Implementation can just like really very closely track, but can't really happen in parallel. Requirements have to drive delivery. Does that make sense? Or
Sort of, it
Yeah,
made a lot of sense to me.
yeah, Saurabh. Yeah.
cool. I know we
I
have
got
2 more minutes left. Any other questions? Any feedback you have for us? And sorry, Divyansh, I didn't mean to kind of stop you. If you have any follow-up, please do ask.
No, sir. It suffice my requirement. Like, look, it's question came due to some past experience. That's why I have asked. Like,
Sure.
can we integrate these two operations or not?
Yeah. I agree. You could potentially just have one follow the other very closely. It's an interesting point. Cool. Absolutely. Thank you, Rutika and Enrico, for joining us. All right, so we are almost at time. One last thing on this, we will post these links in the LinkedIn group, and please feel free to reach out to Akash or myself if you have any questions. Actually, I should have put our email addresses. We'll put them in the LinkedIn group as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Akash, do you want to say anything before we close this call?
Like, we did not prepare for this, Saurabh.
for the thank you. Yeah, we forgot the thank you. No, wait, I have a thank you slide.
Okay.
There you go, Akash.
Okay, that is the slide you had to take, Saurabh. So
Oh. Right. Thanks, everyone, and absolutely reach out to us if you have any follow-up questions on this.
thank you, everyone. Yeah. Have a nice day. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you, Akash. Thanks, Saurabh. Bye-bye.
Absolutely.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks, guys.